Welcome to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, an executive leadership coach and seasoned people leader. This podcast is all about helping leaders grow, navigate challenges, and build high-performing teams with real stories, insights, and strategies you can apply today. Let's dive in.
There's two different kinds of suffering. There's what I call good suffering and there's bad suffering. Good suffering is what you just described, which is the intentionality of choosing to grow in an area of our life because the world isn't the way we want to see it yet. Whether that's speaking of ourselves personally, our families, politics, economics, whatever. There is suffering in change because by suffering, what we're talking about is there's discomfort, there's an acknowledgement that things are not the way that we want them to be or could be or should be. And that's a good kind of suffering. It's suffering with purpose.
Yeah, you're like the Eric Pfeiffer I never knew. Sorry, Eric Pfeiffer on my team. I love you, buddy. Yeah. So this is an untraditional start of the podcast because I was just telling Eric Pfeiffer, who's our guest today, that I thought it was, I have a friend named Eric Pfeiffer on my team. And when I saw Eric Pfeiffer reach out to me, I thought it was this guy on my team punking me. And I was 2 seconds away from slacking him and saying, hey bro, like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, you're waiting for Ashton Kutcher to jump out from behind the scenes.
Yeah, but yeah, Eric, thanks for joining the podcast today. We'll see what we need to cut out later, right?
Yeah, no problem.
We had so many off the cuff moments. That's been wonderful. But yeah, I always ask folks this question. In the next 30 minutes, like, what's the message that you want to bring to everyone that's listening out there?
That's such a good question, David. And sadly, I probably would answer this question different for every time somebody asks me, not because there's not clarity and focus around the message, but there's so many different ways to communicate the message. But the message for MPWR Coaching, which is my executive coaching organization, it's also the kind of the message of my life, which is there's always room for us to become a better version of ourselves. And I'm a big believer that all of the dreams, aspirations, ambitions that we as human beings in any area of our life have are not, let me emphasize, not unlocked by the world conforming to what we're looking for, but by us learning to conform into a better version of ourselves, which means we are now participating in making the life that we're looking for happen. And I'm not talking about, kind of the woo-woo manifestation stuff, which there's a lot of good things in that space, but really more about us understanding that we are the only people who can be in charge of our lives. We're the only people who can be in charge of our attitudes and behaviors, the way we impact our environment, whether we show up as a liability or as an asset. And what I've discovered through my own personal journey, which our coaching business is largely the overflow of all that I've learned over the years of trying to achieve greater things and realizing I'm the person getting in my own way most of the time. We want to blame our boss, coworker. We want to blame politics, economics, social issues. And those are real dynamics, real factors that we have to contend with. But when we wake up to the fact that we are actually in the driver's seat of our own life, too many of us are in the passenger seat, waiting for some external factor to shift or change so that we can actually have the life we want. But when we wake up and realize the marriage I want, the family I want, the finances I want, the business I want, the relationships I want are actually my responsibility. And when we wake up to that and we jump back into the driver's seat of our own life, there's an incredible freedom, either from feeling like you're a hostage to life circumstances or, you are being subjected to the unfair forces of the world around us. There's an incredible freedom when we wake up to that reality and we learn the simple skills of jumping back into the driver's seat, of bringing the better version of ourselves to the different contexts of our life. And guess what? That's when doors start to open for us. That's when opportunities begin to present themselves. They were there all along. But what I tell people is you weren't ready to either see the door, the opportunity, or you weren't capable of pushing through that door or stepping through that opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear your passion, and it sounds like this is, correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like it's stemming from a lot of personal experience.
Lots.
When in your life where you're not in the driver's seat?
Yesterday, the day before. Obviously, I've been on this journey for, probably 20 plus years. It started for me back in my 20s. I'm adulting like everybody else in that stage of life. trying to figure things out. And I was constantly running up against different challenges, whether it was in relationships in the workplace or my personal relationships, and constantly wanting to blame my environment or blame my past, blame my parents for what they didn't provide for me growing up, or blame my circumstances. And I had, thankfully, a mentor in my mid-20s who sat with me one day and just said, hey, listen, you tend to blame the world around you a lot for what's not going your way or what's not going right from your perspective. And this was the phrase that they used. I think you see life as happening to you. And I want to encourage you to practice reframing life as happening for you. That the great experiences, pardon me, it's still early over here in California.
It's okay.
The challenging experiences, you're either going to see those as obstacles that you have to overcome and battle through, and then life becomes this fight against the injustice of, our circumstances, or you're going to choose to see all of those experiences as opportunities for you to grow, you to develop, you to become a better version of yourself. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing you're actually in control of. That conversation was like a massive pivoting point for me. And I then embarked on a journey of asking this question. So how do I jump back into the driver's seat of my own life? How do I take 100% responsibility? And so for the next probably 10 to 15 years after that, I read every book I could get on leadership and a lot of self-help in the self-help section. I went through a lot of counseling. I sought out mentors, people who could share the best of their learning with me. And then I began, because it's kind of naturally the way I think, I began to synthesize and create and develop a kind of coherent framework that served me on my journey of jumping back into the driver's seat. And obviously, you don't really know if you're growing and developing until you get to put it to the test. So I've been married 23 years. I have a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old. So whether it was in my household, whether it was in, business affairs, with extended family, with friends, constantly realizing every experience in life is an opportunity for me to grow and to practice the things that I'm learning. And then, of course, over time, people start saying, man, Eric, how did you do this? How has this worked for you? How did you develop, this competitive edge as a person, as a leader in any environment? And that got me thinking, wow, people, I think it's not just me. I think there's a lot of other people out there that are trying to figure out how to be on this journey. And we've read a lot of books and gone to seminars and taken online courses and whatever. And those are all helpful, but I wasn't seeing anywhere a kind of coherent, synthesized framework that kind of took the best of so much of what I had learned that I had to piece together on my own. And so that began a journey of developing what we now call a leadership operating system, which is just a collection of 8 visual leadership tools that are all focused on, in different ways, from different perspectives, how do I put myself back in the driver's seat?
Yeah. I wonder why. I think I know the answer. Like the word responsibility comes to mind, responsibility mindset as well, like ensuring that it's not happening to me, it's happening for me. And now it's happening for me. I got to do something with it because it's something that's going to be helping me. How do you help those folks who are just stuck? And this is like, I do a lot of coaching with folks.
Yeah.
A lot of people are stuck. They're out there listening to all the podcasts. They have David Goggins yelling in their ear. They have Jocko Willink telling them that they're not good enough. They got Tim Ferriss talking about the 4-hour work week and how to free their life more. You listen to all the podcasters out there, et cetera, et cetera. And yet I've met people who are just absolutely stuck. They don't know where to start. How do you get started? There's so much information. How do you start to start changing and getting back into that driver's seat?
Yeah. The first order of business is to own that you're stuck, right? It's accepting and practicing what we call the skills of self-awareness. Because it's a significant shift when we go from pointing the finger at the world around us to pointing the finger at ourselves. And it's not pointing the finger at ourselves in a condemning, judgmental, hypercritical way. we're not wanting to feed those voices of self-condemnation and judgment, because that just leads down the path of shame and guilt and regret, which most of us know that pathway. It's about waking up to the fact that we are stuck, that we're not experiencing relationships or life in some way, in the way that we long to. I think all human beings have an internal longing to experience life in a way that is vibrant and life-giving. And when we're able to recognize, whether in one small area of our life or across whole, areas of our life, that we feel stuck, that we're not experiencing what we want to experience, that we feel sad or depressed or angry or frustrated or limited, that's the beginning of growth. I have to remind my clients as often as I have to remind myself that growth begins in recognizing that something isn't the way we wished it was. And that affords us the opportunity then to first and foremost take a deeper look into what's going on internally, and which then again gives us the space to take 100% responsibility for our attitudes, our behaviors. How are we contributing to the life that we're experiencing? And once we're able to own that and then begin to recalibrate how we view ourselves and how we lead ourselves, in other words, how we operate in the world around us, that is the beginning of the life of freedom. But it always begins in the same place. So when I sit down with any prospective client, I just ask a lot of questions. Help me understand what's going well, because I want to celebrate what's going well. But where are you frustrated? Where are the tension points? Where do you feel stuck? And once they begin to unpack those areas, we begin to get a clearer view of, okay, can you, if you can own that you feel stuck, that's going to give you the confidence to then own that you have an opportunity to jump back in the driver's seat and to begin to make the necessary changes that will lead to the results that you're longing for.
Yeah. So Eric, I'm curious on your point of view on suffering. And there's a viral video by Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, the CEO there, where he's at Stanford and he's talking about how he became an entrepreneur and all his journey through it. And he actually gave some contradictory advice. He goes, when bad things happen, he tells his team, oh, this is going to cause a lot of hardship and suffering. This is awesome. And at the end of that talk, and this is the part that went viral, is that I'm not sure what advice to give you, except that I hope a lot of hardship and suffering on all of you. Those who just listen to that part think, oh, that's bad. It's actually, what he's saying is that that is how you grow. That is how you learn. And it's something you're talking about, the ownership there, that recognizing it, things aren't the way you want it to be. That's what's causing this suffering. And I use that word very generously. What is your take on that? When I reflect that story to you, a CEO of a successful company saying, I wish suffering on all of you.
I would agree 100% with everything you've just shared, that perspective that growth requires suffering. If you go to the gym and you want to grow your muscles, there's suffering, there's pain, there's discomfort involved. If you want to grow your cardiovascular ability, you're going to have to run further, harder, faster, whatever than you have before. Now, if you want to learn a new skill, there's suffering involved. Now, here's what I would say. There's two different kinds of suffering. There's what I call good suffering and there's bad suffering. Good suffering is what you just described, which is the intentionality of choosing to grow in an area of our life because the world isn't the way we want to see it yet. Whether that's speaking of ourselves personally, our families, politics, economics, whatever. There is suffering in change, because by suffering, what we're talking about is there's discomfort, there's an acknowledgement that things are not the way that we want them to be or could be or should be. And that's a good kind of suffering. It's suffering with purpose. Then there's what I call a bad suffering, which is resigning to the life we have, even though we know it's not what it should be. It's staying in a unhealthy relationship or marriage without any intentionality around wanting to make change. That's what I call bad suffering. Bad suffering is also when we are operating in ways that is leading to consequence. And we continue to operate with those attitudes, those behaviors that continue to reap negative results. That's what I would call bad suffering. So there's good suffering, which is purposeful and leads to change and to a better version of ourselves or the world around us. And there is bad suffering, which is suffering for suffering's sake, because we are unwilling to engage in the change opportunity.
Yeah. One, there is action. Oh, both of them, it's action, right? You are taking responsibility and you're taking action in the good one. And the bad one is your action is no action. Okay, this is what it is. It is what it is.
Absolutely. And the thing for most people, when I'm meeting with different leaders or clients, if they're meeting with me, it's because they've recognized something probably needs to change. Something's not working. Right. It doesn't matter whether it's at the C-suite level of an organization, down through the organization, doesn't matter if it's with clients or whatever's going on. They have recognized something isn't working right. And that's the first order of business, is owning that they feel stuck. And then recognizing the necessity of owning the responsibility of fighting for change. Like, I can't make you more physically fit. A trainer can't make you more physically fit. We can give guidance, but at the end of the day, you have to choose to engage the process of growth and transformation, which requires some level of discomfort, pain, suffering. Okay. And we would say that's good suffering because it's purposeful suffering. What I have found is that we consume books and podcasts and webinars and conferences, and because we have no lack of content, accessibility in our culture today. With the internet, we can read up on anything and learn from the experts. But the challenge is, I think, where most people get derailed is even when we recognize that something needs to change and we draw internally some energy to begin to pave that path, we are not really sure what that path should look like. And so we draw from a variety of different ideas and we try them for a day or a week or a month, and then feel frustrated that we're not seeing the change that we're looking for. And so we abandon that. It's like abandoning one diet fad, for the next and then for the next. And I think in a lot of ways within the kind of coaching leadership development space, there's a lot of that happening. Is we try this person, we read this book, and then we listen to that podcast, and we are inspired by the promise of change and transformation. So we begin to implement what they're recommending. Now, let me just share this kind of simple metaphor, which is the new book that we're coming out with revolves around this metaphor. I tell people, you can download all the apps, leadership apps, personal change apps, personal development apps, right? So all these podcasts and books and all these ideas, they're like apps. We get them, we download them, and then we try to apply them. And then we find out, this isn't really working as well as I hoped it would. And you'll understand this because you're from the tech space. I tell people, it's not the apps that are broken. It's your operating system that's broken. You probably haven't updated your operating system in a long time. And we all know, remember the days when they didn't automatically update and you had to manually update your operating system. It took time and it was an inconvenience and annoyance. And then, some apps didn't work or did work right afterward. And so I tell people, for most of us as human beings, we have over the years developed our own personal operating system. In other words, the prevailing attitudes and behaviors through which we engage ourselves and the world around us. And the problem is we're trying to get all these apps and they're good. Most of what's out there when it comes to leadership is good. Mm-hmm. Most of it is effective. And if we knew how to use it, would actually be helpful for us. It would actually affect change. But what most people are not talking about is that the people who write these books or provide this content, they have done the hard work to upgrade their operating system, their core sense of identity, their core sense of who they are and where they fit in the world and what they're running after, or what I just kind of put under the banner of prevailing attitudes and behaviors. You might want to call those belief systems. But if we are not intentional about upgrading our operating system, then all the wonderful apps that we're downloading are not really going to be effective for us. And so that's a lot of what we focus on, is helping individuals, teams, and organizations say, in the same way that your organization runs on a shared operating system so that, all the different devices can communicate with each other and you can run the apps because the operating system supports, right, the resourcing of these apps so they can actually do their function. I said, if we don't pay attention to upgrading our leadership operating system, then we can bring in this group and that group and we can go through all these trainings, but it's not going to avail much because underlying operating system
Yeah.
is not upgraded.
So what is this? You talked about this visual 8. It was an 8-part leadership operating system. What is it?
Yeah, essentially what it is 8 visual tools, because as human beings, I think we are visually oriented. So it makes the content more memorable, transferable within any context. But they're 8 visual tools, and each tool represents kind of a core set of principles that are all rooted in 2 practices: self-leadership and other leadership. How do I engage myself and put myself back in the driver's seat and operate as a better version of myself? And then secondly, how do I then, from the overflow of that, engage with others, serve others, impact others, so that my presence in any environment is more of an asset than a liability? So when people go through our operating system or our toolkit, they always say the same thing. Eric, I'm familiar with a lot of these ideas and principles and things. I've learned a lot of it. I said, of course you have, because these are universal. Like these are the same principles that human beings have been wrestling with and talking about for generations and generations. All we've done is create a simple, coherent system that brings all of those fundamental principles together so that people can rest assured that once they upgrade their operating system, in other words, that they align themselves with the principles of these tools, then they can guarantee that they will operate more effectively so that they can then employ all of the wonderful things they're learning from all the books and podcasts.
Yeah. A lot of the tools, if you listen to all the stuff out there, I'm going to call it stuff. It shares a lot of common themes around responsibility, sticking to a plan. There's suffering involved, pain involved, change is not easy, blah, 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 blah. Right. And, when you present someone with, well, here's a system for it. They're like, well, we kind of know it. We're like, okay, how's it going? How well are you sticking to it? I bring that up because as you were talking, I was looking at the date on my computer. It's near the end of January. How many people are talking about New Year's resolutions and how's that going right now? I haven't heard a word about how anyone's doing there. And I guarantee you, those gyms are not full anymore. People have gone off those diets, whatever they wanted to do. I think a lot of those folks are just not there. And it's the fundamentals. You got to have the strong fundamentals, right? Like, how are you taking responsibility for your actions, for your situation, and not blaming others?
Yeah.
Like right at the beginning, what we said. Yeah.
Here's what's interesting, David. My experience in the limited world that I participate in is this was the first year where there was a prevailing sentiment that I'm not going to make any New Year's resolutions. In years past, it's what everybody talked about, especially as a coach. I'm talking with people about change and transformation and let's review the year behind. Let's talk about the year ahead. And everybody gets really pumped up and excited about New Year's resolutions because it's a natural change in the season. It's an opportunity to say, I want to do something new. And this was the first year where my experience was everybody was kind of saying, yeah, I'm not really setting this year. I'm not really interested in that. No. And as I started to ask questions, and again, I'm not sure that my understanding is correct in this, but what I've discovered is I think, and for a lot of different reasons, people are growing weary of wanting to commit themselves to some kind of transformative experience because they're losing confidence that it's actually going to happen. So let me give you an illustration to kind of maybe paint a picture of what I think is going on. I've been married for 23 years. My wife and I, from the very beginning of our marriage, have really been committed to our own personal growth and also to the growth of our relationship. And then obviously, as we have 2 kids come into the household, how do you be a family? And so we've been committed to this. But every now and again, we find ourselves at an impasse. Some tensions are kind of boil to a head in our marriage. We're trying to figure it out. We're reading books. We're seeking out help. And you just kind of feel stuck. And what I've discovered in each of those situations is we eventually concede and we go, okay, let's go find a good marriage counselor and maybe they can help us get unstuck. And the times when we've got unstuck is because the marriage counselor would say, well, what have you guys been doing? How have you been trying to reconcile these differences or these frustrations or tensions? And we would both share, well, we're doing this, and we've learned this from this book, and we've read this, and I've listened to this podcast, and we're trying to apply all these amazing things we've learned, and none of it seems to work. And in those moments, the counselors that have been most effective for us have said, those things that you're doing, those are actually really good practices. The problem is not the things you're trying to apply to your marriage. The problem is, Eric, fundamentally, you still have some distorted beliefs, or what this one counselor called limited beliefs or limiting beliefs. You still are carrying some things around in your internal kind of mental ecosystem that are inhibiting you from being able to practice these new things. The practices aren't broken. It's that no matter how much you practice those things, it's not going to avail much because you're still stuck in these old ways of thinking. Thought, oh my gosh, that is. And when we individually and collectively as a marriage would do the hard work to kind of unpack those distorted or limiting beliefs internally and exchange those for life-giving, healthy, empowering beliefs, radically transformed the outcome of the same practices we were trying to practice before. And we would get the breakthroughs we're looking for. So I say that because when it comes to the New Year's resolutions, I think people are frustrated because they've tried a lot of different things. They've tried to make change. They've applied all of the best technologies and support systems they can find. And yet, if we are unable to recognize, again, I use the language of operating system, but if we're unable to recognize those distorted or limiting beliefs that we still are operating with, kind of like the code, in a computer program, if the code, if the code is broken, to use layman's terms, then the program will never operate the way we need it to operate.
Yeah, I absolutely understand what you mean. Fundamentally, it's the limiting beliefs and the values of the individual, and there's some incongruency with what they're trying to achieve, and it's holding them back from being able to achieve any goal. I have one individual I know that I've been coaching who wants to become an entrepreneur, yet when we dig into their values, one of their core values is financial stability.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an incongruency there with the type of risks they want to take with entrepreneurship. And they're wondering why, and they know, but maybe not know enough, like, why am I not succeeding at this entrepreneurship thing? Yet they know, oh, wait, I think I really value financial stability. So instead of taking those chances that a lot of entrepreneurs take, right? Like, I'm going to have to take out a loan, or I'm going to need to hire an apprentice here. That's going to be extra money. And it might be a 7-year, 8-year, 10-year thing before I, can scale to the next level. It holds them back from making that next step because they want that financial stability at the core. And so that's an example that goes through my mind with someone I know.
I couldn't agree more. I love that. The prevailing attitudes, behaviors, or beliefs that we operate from, which include our core values. And by the way, what I tell people is not your aspirational values, but I want to know about your behavioral values, because I tell people your prevailing behaviors will betray what you think your core values are.
Yep.
It's like when I walk into a company, I work with them long enough, and they say, "Oh no, we have core values. They're on our website. They're in this, in this document." I say, "Great, what are they?" And I read them, and I said, "Why aren't I seeing these practiced here in this environment?" Those are aspirational values. That's great if you want to be that kind of people or that kind of culture. But what we have to dial into is, what are your actual behavioral values? Because that's what's going to shape how you operate more often than not. And most people are unaware of their behavioral values. So for example, financial stability would be a behavioral value in the way that gets expressed, which we don't realize could be antithetical to the future that we're trying to create.
Yep. Which is the aspiration itself. This is very interesting, because I was just talking to someone a few hours ago about they're talking about their values. They're a wonderful leader I work with, and they just rattled off like, this is what it is, and maybe and they go, "What about you, Dave?" I go, I used to know, maybe 4 years ago, but I don't feel like I'm in alignment with those anymore. If you ask me right now what my true behavioral values actually are, I'm going to have to do a refactoring of that
Yeah.
soon, right? Because I read what I wrote 4 years ago, I think I'm a different person. Not good or bad. It's just I'm a different person, and so I'm going to have to refactor that. And so that's why those plaque on the wall, right? I would challenge some companies to say, do you need to rework these?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to stick to it, what are you willing to do, and what are you willing to give up in order to achieve it? So lots of problems that we need to solve in the world, Eric. So I have some rapid fire questions for you.
Go for it.
So we're going to make these Instagram worthy. All right.
Okay.
What's one habit or skill that you feel has made you successful?
Journaling. I started journaling about 20 years ago at the behest of a former mentor. And I realized that the point for me of journaling is keeping a running record of my growth and development journey in my process. And so every 3 months, I go back and reread some of my journal entries so that I can make sure I'm picking up what I'm learning along the way, because we forget what we've experienced, we forget what we've been through. And so journaling for me is just keeping a record of my own personal transformation journey so that I'm able to glean from my own journey as much as I'm able to glean from everything else that I might read.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Take 100% personal responsibility for your attitudes and your behaviors, and the life that you're looking for will come to view.
If you could have dinner with one historical figure, who would it be and why?
For me, it would be, now there's a debate whether this is a historical figure, but for me, it would be Jesus, because I've operated, in the Christian community for a lot of years. And there's a lot of, for me, irreconcilable differences between what I read about in the Bible and fell in love with this ideology and who this person is, and what I see represented by the Christian community out in the world. And so I would just love to sit with him and be able to process all of those frustrations and discrepancies and hear from the person himself.
With AI, you can probably have that conversation right now. Right?
What'd you say?
With AI,
With AI?
you can probably have that conversation right now. It's like, hey, what were you thinking there?
Yeah, 100%.
So if you had to give advice to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell Eric Pfeiffer of 20 years old?
Probably the same thing that I say over and over to my own kids. Life is not about figuring it out and having your plan and setting your career trajectory and having this perfect future dialed in. Instead, it's about experiencing life and experimenting and figuring out who you are and following the breadcrumbs of discovering not just who you are, but what contribution you can make to the world around you and what kind of life you want to live. It's just too much pressure for young people to have it all figured out. And I have to remind people over and over and over again in that age group, this isn't the season to have it figured out. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't have anything figured out right now. That's what the journey is for.
Yeah. I try to tell my kids, like, whatever you choose to do next, like choosing a major in college, whatever. Cool. That's just the appetizer, the first appetizer in this meal, right? Your main course could look very, very different. I don't care what you study.
As it has for most people.
I think for a lot of people, honestly.
Yeah.
Last question to you. And I ask every guest this same question. What's one question I should have asked you, but I did not?
I've been asked this question on podcasts before, and you're stumping me because you've asked great questions that are really well-rounded. I honestly can't think of one, David.
Okay. Yes, perfection. Perfect. I knew I was
Great
good,
job,
Eric. I knew I was good. Thanks for validating that. Growth mindset for the win.
Yes.
All right, Eric. Well, I appreciate you. Don't hang up when I want to press stop on the recording. But I guess anything else you'd like to say to the folks out there before we finish off this podcast?
I'm assuming that a lot of your listeners, they're listening to a podcast like yours because they're longing for something different in their life. And the thing I love to encourage your listeners to is, number one, that's great. Whether you feel stuck, whether you have a clear vision for the future or you do not, either way, I tell people you're not alone. Like, we are all on this adventure, whether I work with people who are literally worth billions of dollars or people who are just scraping by, trying to figure out what their next career move is. We're all in the same boat. And that's a beautiful thing about us as human beings, is that we're all so different, but there are similarities. And one of those is we're all still trying to figure it out. Nobody's arrived. Nobody's figured it all out. Maybe you're successful in business, but you're struggling in your marriage or your family relationships. Maybe you're successful in the family, but you're struggling in your business. Just life is a struggle. You're not alone, and it's worth fighting for. Like whatever is the more that we want to see in our life, it's worth fighting for, because we can't control the outcome. But I believe that the journey is worth it. Whether we reach a particular destination or not, what we discover is our own personal growth and transformation and development really is the destination, becoming a better version of ourselves. And so I want to encourage all your listeners, stay with it, keep fighting for it. It's worth it.
With that, Eric, thank you for the words of wisdom. And thank you everyone for listening to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. If you like this episode, like, subscribe, rate it. It really helps out this podcast. All right, Eric, thanks for joining.
Thank you, David.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, and my mission is to help leaders grow, lead with impact, and build thriving teams. If you found this valuable, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow leader. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.